in-flight violence that we are seeing in the skies on a too frequent basis. Now, the mask mandates have ended, but the epidemic of air rage continues, and the violence has to stop. 4 years ago, there were about 150 investigations into air rage incidents. Last year, there were 831, and the mask mandate ended last April. Masks have nothing to do with the recent incidents of people trying to open aircraft doors mid-flight or stab crew members with food utensils. These actions would be shocking and unacceptable in any setting. But on an airplane, such behavior can also represent a real threat to all those on board. We must do more to protect employees and the traveling public, and the Protection from Abusive Passengers Act does that. It's very straightforward. Passengers must get on board and follow the rules and not commit acts of violence, or they won't be permitted on commercial aircraft again. It would grant the TSA flexibility to develop this no-fly list and ensure it is fair, transparent, and includes due process and the opportunity for appeal. There should be zero tolerance for any violent behavior that affects a flight safety. And these unacceptable air rage attacks represent a small fraction of overall flights, but the rate of incidents is still elevated and unacceptable. When passengers attack crew members 30,000 feet in the air, it poses a risk to everyone on board. Airlines already have the right to refuse service to unruly passengers, but offenders can still endanger people and personnel on other airlines. So we have to stop this violence, and that's the goal of this bill. Attacking a member of a flight crew or a fellow passenger, if you do that, you will be held accountable and lose your privileges to fly commercial aircraft. Now, I'm going to stop right there and recognize my colleague from the great state of California, Representative Eric Swalwell. Eric, come on in, sir.
Thanks, sir. Thank you, Senator Reed, for being a partner in the Senate on this bipartisan, bicameral legislation. And this is simply to make sure that when it comes to flying, we protect the people who protect us. The pilots, the flight attendants, the flight crew, they've worked hard over the past few years. They've been through hell and back, from this pandemic to just a very tense, hot political environment in America. But we want it to be clear. We want it to be transparent. We want it to be the most transparent part of your flight experience. When it comes to violence, if you try, you will not fly. These people have taken care of us in flight. Their top job is to ensure our safety. And the number one thing, the feedback that I hear from pilots and flight attendants, this isn't what we signed up for. We're willing to be away from our families. We're willing to get you to your wedding, to your business trip, to your funeral, to your kid's graduation, that long-awaited vacation. We're willing to do all of that and get you there safely. But we didn't sign up to break up a fist fight at 30,000 feet. So we want it to be clear to every passenger who boards a plane. This legislation will put a process in place, because right now the process it's not formalized, it's ad hoc, but a process will be put in place that makes sure every passenger knows if you commit violence in the skies, you will no longer fly. I want to thank the flight attendants and the pilots, the different associations and unions who've worked with us to craft this legislation. I want to thank Brian Fitzpatrick, my colleague in the House. There's a lot of issues that Republicans and Democrats battle over every single day, but when it comes to pilot and flight attendant safety, there is no distance between us. Their safety has to come first, because if they're safe, all of us can get to our destination safely. That's what this legislation is about. I'm going to turn it over now to Brian because he's been such a faithful partner in this. But again, if you haven't heard this enough, to our pilots and flight attendants, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's now our duty to protect you. Brian.
Yeah. Morning, everybody, or afternoon. I'm not sure what time it is. So the job that these women and men have to endure on a good day is hard. When the pandemic hit, it became very, very challenging for a whole host of reasons. And we've always talked about with the pandemic, there was going to be a physical health crisis phase and then a looming secondary mental health crisis phase. And I think we're seeing that across the spectrum. And Eric had mentioned, when people sign up for a certain job, and this is a frontline job, very, very important job for the safety, not only the safety of passengers, but of American commerce, which depends on safe travel. Their job is hard on a good day. When you layer on top of that the mental health crisis that we're facing and the manifestation of criminal activity and crimes of violence, it's made a tough job on a good day even more and more difficult. And as Eric and Senator Reed know, it's not easy to get really anything done in this town. This should be very, very simple. In fact, I don't say this very often. I'm quite optimistic about this getting across the finish line. For all of our advocates out there, obviously, there's 435 members of the House. If we can get 290 co-sponsors on this bill, this is actually something that was written into the rules package. It will put it on something called the consensus calendar, and it will force a floor vote. And if you have 290 co-sponsors, you only need 218 for a bill to pass. This is something that I anticipate will get broad bipartisan support, hopefully broad bicameral support as well. And hopefully we can get a standalone passage of this. If not, we'll work to get it attached to a larger must-move piece of legislation. But much like the senator and the representative, I just want to thank all of our frontline flight attendants, pilots, and everybody who work to keep us safe. Acts of violence are outlandish and unacceptable at any time. They're especially outlandish and unacceptable at 30,000 feet inside a closed airline cabin. It's a very, very dangerous situation when people sign up to work for an airline to help us travel safely. They're not certified mental health experts. They're not police officers or federal agents. They have a very different job, and yet we're asking them to do things that they're not supposed to be doing and should never be doing. So there's a number of different aspects of this legislation. You can find it online. Obviously, it creates essentially an expansion or the equivalent of a do not fly list, jacks up the penalties. Anytime we're trying to get less of some sort of activity, there's got to be strong deterrent, strong punishments that follow, and make sure that those people can never come anywhere near any airport in this country ever again. It's the least we can do for the people that keep us safe every day. So for the press, thank you for covering this, because a big part of this is spreading the word of the existence of this legislation. We need you to air it in every media market in America so that people can then therefore go to their representatives, ask them to co-sponsor this bill, help us exceed that 290 threshold, get this on the floor quickly and get it passed for our heroes here. Thanks.
Hi, thank you for asking me to be here today. My name is Jennifer Vitallo. I was assaulted on the aircraft. The assault that happened against me was on the ground. We were taking off, and a passenger got up, started screaming obscenities, and came to the aft galley door and began to open it. So I contacted the flight deck immediately, and at that time, the passenger started to assault me. I was hit in the head, knocked to the ground, and I sustained very serious injuries as a result of that. Was taken to the hospital. I spent probably about 10 days there, and it took about 15 months before I was able to return to work. It was something that I was determined to do, and I had to go through a lot of fit-for-duty tests with my company to do that. And I can say, thanks to the grace of God and the people that I had supporting me, I was able to return to work. I am very grateful for this legislation. Had something like this been in place, the person that assaulted me would not have been allowed back on an aircraft, whether it's my carrier or another carrier. They could come back. That's part of some of the sustained trauma that we feel, is that somebody can assault us or our crew members, and they can travel on another airline with you or your families too. And we're there to do the job, and we want to keep our passengers safe as well as each other. And we deserve to go to work and to come home in the same shape that we were in when we got there. So this legislation helps us to be able to do just that. So with that, thank you. Thank you for bringing this forth and asking me to be here.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to share my story today. My name is Cher Taylor. I am a union flight attendant with Frontier Airlines based in Orlando, and I am a proud member of the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA. Our union represents over 50,000 flight attendants at 19 airlines. Flight attendants have dealt with disruptive passengers for decades, but the last 3 years have reached new heights. Flight attendants face verbal and physical assault at unprecedented levels during the pandemic. You've all seen the headlines. Unfortunately, one of them was a flight I worked. While deplaning a flight in Miami in July of 2021, like most events, this one was recorded by other passengers and it made national headlines. As I was walking through the cabin to make sure passengers didn't leave anything behind, I started to hear commotion. I looked up and saw a white male passenger in his late 50s, early 60s, around 200 pounds, assaulting someone with his left fist in between the seats in the mid cabin. I climbed over the seats, and as I rushed forward to see if the person he was hitting was another flight attendant or a passenger, I couldn't obtain the view as to who was in between the seats on the floor. All I heard was me turning around to tell the A flight attendant to call the gate agent and tell them to immediately call the police. While attempting to do this, the white male kept shouting explicits. This effing blank, you're gonna get it today, N-word, you effing N-word. I was afraid that the D flight attendant, a black woman, was getting assaulted. She was so close to where the fight broke out. The white male continuously raised his left hand to throw punch after punch after punch to who I then realized was a black male passenger. I continued to shout at him, "Sir, stop it. Sir, you need to stop." He again shouted the explicit, using the F-bomb and the N-word, and repeatedly telling him that he was going to beat him good, N-word. I ended up having a verbal altercation with the gate agent because when he finally made it on the plane, instead of going to get help, he watched the fight. More passengers came and began to pull the white male from between the seats. Eventually, when he was pulled into the aisle, the black male that was on the floor in between the seats put himself right up and knelt down. Realizing we had no help, one of the other flight attendants called 911. The racial slurs continued as passengers separated. I want to be clear with you guys. This incident was not over a mask mandate. It was over a carry-on bag. The white male and his white female companion proceeded to walk slowly to the front of the cabin with the younger black male and what appeared to be his family in tow. The family walked toward me, still yelling the N-word and stating that they would kill all of us. I yelled to the gate agent, "That's them. Aren't you going to stop them? That's them." He replied, "I can't make them wait. I can't hold them." To which I became upset and stated, "What was the point? You told me to keep them on the plane until the police got here. What are you doing?" I was crying. I was traumatized. Law enforcement didn't come in time. The perpetrator walked off the plane and nothing happened. All of this, all because a black man wasn't getting his luggage fast enough. I've had months of therapy and struggled initially to go back to work. I'm still haunted by this incident. A few weeks ago, another incident made national headlines when a violent passenger attempted to open a main cabin door and stab a flight attendant 3 times. The violent incidents have not stopped. I want to thank Senator Reed, Congressman Swalwell, and Fitzpatrick for introducing this bill, which will ban passengers who will be fined by the FAA, TSA, or convicted for interfering with a crew member or an unruly passenger on a plane. Strong penalties are needed to curb violent and unacceptable behavior. Bad behavior should not fly, and we urge Congress to pass this bill immediately.
Good morning. Thank you, Senator Reed, Representative Swalwell, and Representative Fitzpatrick for the opportunity to share my story that will be familiar to many flight attendants. My name is Peter Enriquez. I've been a flight attendant for 36 years, the last 32 years with American Airlines. I hope that by sharing my story, Congress will pass laws to better protect flight attendants so that colleagues, including my daughter, a 4-year American Airlines flight attendant who is here with me today, will never ever have to experience this similar situation. On January 9th of 2023, somewhere between Miami and London, I explained to a passenger why he would need to return to his assigned seat in his assigned cabin. Flight attendants do not have authority to upgrade passengers mid-flight, and for security reasons on international flights, passengers must remain in their assigned cabins. This was a message that the captain had already relayed through the intercom, but so far had been ignored. The passenger refused to comply with the request and proceeded to call me a fat, bald C-word. He approached me threateningly, spitting on me, while I backed away through the business class cabin until I was trapped in the galley. I attempted to de-escalate the situation. He continued to provoke me into a physical altercation. However, flight attendants always maintain a certain level of professionalism. Then he spat again in my face and sucker punched me in the eye. I was knocked back 3 feet before falling to the ground. As I scrambled to get back on my feet, I felt my face begin to swell and bleed. I informed the captain of the incident, and the plane was discreetly turned back to Miami. As safety professionals, our priority was to ensure that the remainder of the flight was calm and uneventful, so that everyone on the plane stayed safe. Upon landing, my assailant was arrested. It is disappointing to me that a passenger who was arrested for physically assaulting and spitting in a flight attendant's face can continue to fly on commercial airplanes here in the United States. Instead of going to jail, my assailant received community service and a fine. The community service was never completed, and the fine will likely not be paid. Why does assault in the air receive less severe punishment than assault on the ground? My assailant was not held accountable for his actions, and this needs to change. Thank you for introducing the Protection from Abusive Passengers Act. I hope this bill will make our airplanes safer for everyone on board.
After listening to Jennifer and Cher and Pete, you can see why this legislation is absolutely critical. And I know Eric and Brian are going to work very hard in the House, and we're going to work very hard in the Senate. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you for what you do every day. You don't need this extra trauma at all. Questions or comments?
Yeah, happy to take any questions, and thank you again for sharing and reliving those awful, completely preventable experiences. Any questions?
Any questions?
Great.
Thank you.
Well, we've got work to do, as
yeah.
Brian said, but we've got a champion in the Senate. Brian and I are going to do our work in the House, and we hope that we can report back to these brave, hardworking men and women behind us that we've got the job done, and we're going to get to work to do that. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you so much. Thank you.